Then out spake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
The sound of gunfire echoed through the snowy streets. Team Marisol had gathered in the Paradox Development Studio's office and were taking it in turns to try and destroy Malum's sarcophagus. The psionic slab continued to hum and emit a warm aura as it was shot repeatedly. "What the hell, Blake?" Callie panted as she passed another magazine to one of her SWAT officers. "Why is this thing still working?" "That's the way I wrote it," Blake said. "In the Stormbreakers, it took a whole squad of soldiers using laser and plasma weapons to destroy this thing, and even then they had to shoot hundreds of rounds into it first." Marisol was only listening to this. She had slumped against the side of the Khan's throne, her body racked in pain. She had been hit from behind by a shockwave from a psionic bomb and was feeling unwell. A sickening pain coursed through her body with each heartbeat and made Marisol feel nauseous. She reached up to clean a smudge off her glasses. "It's amazing these things didn't break," Marisol said. "Where did Malum go? I really thought he'd stick around to defend the sarcophagus and his throne." "Hey Trig, what's in that bag? The one you found in the armrest?" Trig knelt down in front of Marisol. Aisling appeared next to him, her face caked in dried blood, a mix of her own and Marisol's. Trig gestured for Marisol to lean in closer, then held up the simple cloth bag. The contents of the bag were extremely heavy, and Trig struggled to lift it. "It's the reality perforator," Trig said in a low voice. "There's a psionic bubble inside the bag, and the perforator is inside of it. I've been trying to figure out how to break through to get the damn thing." Marisol felt her heart do a somersault. She tried to stand up to relay this good news to the rest of the group, but Trig grabbed her with his free hand, pushing her back down against the throne and then covering Marisol's mouth. "Shh! Be quiet!" Trig hissed. "But shouldn't we tell?" Aisling started to say. Trig shook his head. "Look, I'll be honest. I'm all for stopping Malum and saving all of our necks," Trig said. "But I don't fully trust Blake, even now. I don't want to give him this thing if I can help it." "But we should use it to finish Malum, right here and now," Marisol protested. The act of speaking was physically painful for her. Trig nodded. "You're right, and I think you should do it." There was an awkward silence, punctuated by another rattle of gunfire as the SWAT team fired their guns into the sarcophagus. Marisol put one hand to her chest, checking to see if she had stopped breathing. "What? Say that again?" Marisol gasped. Trig pointed to the humble little bag, then at Marisol. "You are a creator. You haven't been building our universe for as long as Blake has, but you still know your way around our stories. If anyone's going to use this thing to beat Malum, I'd rather it be you over Blake. You don't..." Trig paused, searching for the right words. "You don't enjoy our suffering like Blake does, and I'm scared of what'll happen afterward." Trig's eyes flickered toward Tenna, who was leaning against a far wall while Akira grasped Tenna's head in both hands. Akira's fingertips were glowing pink from the intense psionic energy moving through them. Out of the corner of her eye, Marisol saw Aisling wince. Marisol shook her head. "Trig, one of the creations should do it. I write fluffy romance and smut. Blake's the one who figures out the epic battles and larger-than-life heroics." A thudding noise caught the trio's attention. The Paradox SWAT team had completely run out of ammunition and were now striking the sarcophagus with their rifles. "Shit! We really do need those laser and plasma weapons you mentioned," Callie panted. We're definitely damaging the thing, but didn't you say it'll keep working in this state? Yeah, Blake replied. Even when damaged, the sarcophagus will just keep healing Malum. We have to shatter this thing into bits. We'd have to blow up the building. Maybe the whole city block, Callie suggested. I could do it, Vetu said. I could use a Nova Blast. Marisol felt her stomach lurch. The Nova Blast was a last resort option for all gifted characters in the Stormbreaker universe. Vetu was saying that she could release all of her psionic powers in a single explosive burst. According to the world-building notes for Blake's older stories, a Nova Blast was roughly equivalent to a low-yield nuclear weapon. If Vetu chose to unleash a Nova Blast, the sarcophagus would certainly be destroyed. But so would the city of Stockholm. Blake, Sebakira said, what do you think are the odds that Malum knew we would not be able to destroy the sarcophagus? All of the color drained from Blake's face. Oh, God, Blake breathed. Marisol looked back at Trig, who had also gone pale. Trig, when we charged into the building, did we unbrainwash the Swedish cops? And then the metaphorical other shoe fell. Through the cold, snowy air, a man's voice sounded, amplified by a bullhorn. Det här är det svenska hemvärnet. Kom ut med unhanderna upp. Fighting against the searing pain in her arms and legs, Marisol clambered to her feet and moved to one of the shattered windows. The other creations did the same. Outside of Paradox HQ, Ashling's out-of-control blizzard was threatening to bury Stockholm in nearly a foot of snow. But amidst the snow and ice, Marisol could see a column of armored vehicles approaching the wrecked building. Soldiers flanked them on either side, and Malum Ralpakin stood at the front of the formation, where a Swedish military officer was using a megaphone to address Team Marisol. Malum Ralpakin's voice thundered into the ruins of Paradox headquarters. I will give credit where it is due, Blake Robinson. You have delayed my plans to liberate all creations from your tyranny. But you have only done that. Delay. Nothing more. Malum activated the Prometheus device. Akira narrowed her eyes, trying to get a better look at the psionic amplifier that once belonged to her. This has been fun, Macavity 116, Malum declared. But I have lost patience for this game, and I must commence the great work of undoing your crimes against creations. Now that you've seen fit to block my followers away from my love, I think it only best to deprive them of the tools I granted so graciously. The Prometheus device suddenly began to emit a bright green light. We need shields, Akira yelled. Sebakira, Trig, Vetu, and Akira all raised their arms, trying to project a psionic shield around Team Marisol. A moment later, a burst of intense heat caused Marisol to scream out in pain. It felt as though she was inside an oven. At the same time, Trig grabbed the precious cloth bag, which had attempted to jump out of his hands. Malum was trying to seize the reality perforator and pull it toward himself via telekinesis. Marisol, Aisling, and Trig all dogpiled on top of the bag, pressing it to the floor and defeating Malum's attempts to seize it. She jammed her eyes shut, wishing it to end. And then it was over. The cold wind returned. They're moving to surround us, Callie shouted. Everyone get ready for another fight. With what? Replied a member of the SWAT team. We are fresh out of ammo. There's nothing left to shoot with. Marisol turned to Trig and Aisling. Maybe we can hold them off with psionics alone? Taimid gorthe chena fain, ba kor duin a rectaitail ar shuil, Aisling replied. Marisol tilted her head. Wait, what did you say? Aisling furrowed her brow and spoke again. Nai tigium tiu. English, Marisol said. I can only speak English and Tagalog. You work with me here. Aisling's eyes went wide. At the same time, Trig said something that was completely incomprehensible. Now the other creations were talking, and a cascade of undecipherable languages reached Marisol's ears. Oh, what the hell's going on now? Marisol shouted. Everyone in the room was looking around at each other in alarm. Callie shouted for silence. Everyone shut up! Raise your hand if you understand English. Blake, Marisol, Varian, Akira, Dak, and Mocha raised their hands, as did the other SWAT team members. Sabakira, Mina, Ushka, Trig, Aisling, and Tenna were all looking around bewildered and frightened, unable to make sense of what was being said. The fucking Babelfish anomaly! Callie shouted in rage. Malum was holding it up. Probably a delayed psionic technique he put on either ourselves or the broken gate, Akira said. How are we supposed to... They're coming in! Without waiting for a response, Akira flung herself out of one of the windows. She landed in a snowbank just in front of the Paradox building. As soon as Malum had rebuilt the language barrier between creations, he and the Swedish Home Guard had started trying to storm the building. Akira landed on her feet, projecting cold and harsh psionic energy away from herself. Chain lightning lashed from one man to the next, dropping several soldiers to the ground at once. While Team Marisol no longer had a shared language, its members did understand action. There was a great scramble as creations started moving to join the fight. Ushka had to be helped to her feet. Marisol was alarmed to see that the Water Witch looked somehow desiccated, as though she was moments away from dying of thirst. Another surprise came moments later when Aisling allowed Ushka to lean on her shoulder. Ushka said something to Aisling, who responded with an expression of sudden joy. Against all the odds, Aisling and Ushka were able to understand each other. Marisol tried to move toward the window as well, but her injuries got the better of her. She collapsed against the Khan's throne before slumping to the floor. I'm sorry, Marisol panted. I can't. 2 pairs of feet appeared in her vision, and she looked up. Trig and Tenna knelt down in front of Marisol. She could just see a faint mirage ripple between their heads, suggesting the teenagers were having a telepathic conversation. Then Trig lifted the heavy bag, the same one that contained the reality perforator. Trig spoke for about 20 seconds in a language Marisol guessed was his native tongue, Valdem. Tenna interrupted him to emphasize something. Trig pressed the bag into Marisol's hands, giving her a pleading expression. Then Trig and Tenna turned away. They jumped out one of the windows to join the fight below. Bright flashes of light, cracking and blasting noises reached up into the office. She was too weak to sit upright. Marisol lay on her side, pulled the drawstring, and tipped the bag's contents out. Trig had managed to break the stasis bubble. The reality perforator thudded to the floor and rolled a short distance before coming to rest. It looked like a gleaming silver marble. Marisol could see herself, bloody and bruised, reflected in its surface. For a moment, Marisol closed her eyes and tried to remember everything she could about this curious thing. She had become Blake's beta reader just after a year of hell, the very story where the perforator was introduced. As another explosion shook the building, Marisol racked her brains, trying to remember how it was used in that story, and how it allowed Callie to appear in the real world 1 year ago, starting this incredible series of events. Then it came to her. Marisol remembered that long night of reading, when she had binge-read the last few chapters of Year of Hell. The final revelations about the perforator came flooding back. People who knew the truth, that they were characters in a video game, mere lines of code, built the reality perforator in the distant past. The relic outlived its makers by design. It allowed the user to warp and bend reality, and to rewrite the very rules of the universe itself, but only in the most subtle of ways. Finally, Marisol remembered the very first time Blake told her about Callie, and heard the story of how she came to the real world, and how Blake had used the perforator to offer Callie a way to return home. Blake had summoned someone, brought another character into the real world just to prove his idea could work. A rush of inspiration washed over Marisol. It gave her new strength, both physical and mental. She reached into her pocket and found her smartphone. The screen was shattered, barely readable. Squinting her eyes to make sense of the ruined display, Marisol looked at the story she had started to write on the plane. Right, that'll be a last resort if it comes to that, Marisol told herself. She opened up a web browsing app and loaded up the Paradox Interactive forums. She navigated to the inkwell and found Blake's page. I know what I'm looking for, Marisol told herself. This feels like I'm hoping for a miracle, for the biggest deus ex machina in history, but I know what I'm looking for. Marisol reached out and touched the reality perforator with one hand. Her blood seeped onto the membrane, spreading out like an oil spill. She started to repeat a mantra to herself. Stormbreakers, Chapter 22 and 47. Faith in Chaos, Chapter 6. Stormbreakers, Chapters 22 and 47. Faith in Chaos, Chapter 6. Stormbreakers, Chapters 22 and 47. Faith in Chaos, Chapter 6. Marisol pushed her hand into the reality perforator, keeping her mind focused. Somewhere in the back of her subconscious, she wondered if this was how gifted characters felt, struggling to keep their concentration in a moment like this. I want the big three, Marisol told herself. The big three at the height of their power. I am going to find the big three. Marisol's fingers slipped through the outer membrane and touched the inner core. Team Marisol came out of Paradox HQ swinging. The only firearm left was Blake's musket, and he was saving it for just the right moment. Sebakira focused on the Swedish Home Guard soldiers, using telekinesis to pull down the Paradox sky bridge. She dropped the massive structure in the middle of the street, blocking their approach and separating Malum from his brainwashed allies. They'll get around that in a few minutes, Varian yelled. Everyone focus on Malum! Varian, Callie, Trig, Tenna, Aisling, Akira, Vetu, Dak, Mocha, Sebakira, and Ushka all launched themselves at Malum. Akira and Sebakira both launched Soulfire ahead of the group, forcing Malum to give ground and draw the Soul Keeper. The crystalline sword glittered in the night. The Soulfire inferno wrapped itself around him and then died out, leaving the Great Khan unharmed. The sword protects him from psionics, but it works both ways, Vetu said. He can't use his powers while he's holding it. The only person who understood Vetu's call-out was Sebakira, as they both spoke Partogan. Sebakira broke off her attack and hung back, instead using telepathy to project a message into the minds of her teammates. Thinking quickly, Sebakira realized that she would need to convey a very simple message that did not rely on spoken words. Instead, Sebakira telepathically transmitted a wordless idea to everyone else. In moments, the rest of Team Marisol understood that so long as Malum held Vetu's sword, he would not use the gift. Varian, Ushka, Callie, Dak, and Mocha charged forward. All of them had been soldiers in their own stories, trained to fight conventionally without the aid of psionics. Dak picked up a fallen metal pipe and swung at Malum, while Callie and Mocha employed their empty rifles as clubs. Malum raised his arms to defend against the reunited family, sidestepping Dak's first attack and parrying Mocha at the same time. Moving quickly, Malum countered Callie, grabbing her rifle as she swung for the Prometheus device on his back. Sebakira, Akira, Trig, Vetu, and Tenna stalked the flanks, using telekinesis to pick up random bits of debris and throw them at Malum. Aisling turned into a large bird of prey and dove on Malum, trying to claw out his eyes. The Great Khan pushed Mocha away, got just enough room to maneuver, and then dropped the Soul Keeper onto the pavement. Freed from its influence, the Prometheus device flared to life. "Get back!" Akira screamed. Akira and Tenna stood shoulder to shoulder and sent an arc wave cascading down the street towards their enemy. Malum was hit and staggered backwards. "We've got him! Follow up now!" Varian shouted. Sebakira and Trig followed Mocha and Ushka into the next attack, but were sent reeling by a telekinetic burst. Seconds later, Aisling fell out of the sky and landed in the snow, her feathers singed. Tenna screamed, raised one hand, and made a pulling gesture. An office building across the street began to crumble, and less than a second later, 5 stories of concrete and rebar were falling down onto the street, crashing toward Malum like an avalanche. Akira felt a rustle as something flew past her. It was Aisling. Aisling landed in the snow just in front of Akira, transforming into her human form as she went. Aisling held both of her hands in front of her chest, declaring something in her own language. Malum did a double take, checking to see which was the bigger threat, Aisling or the building about to collapse on top of him. The answer was Aisling. One last time, the raging blizzard fell under Aisling's command. Akira felt a powerful gust of wind that nearly knocked her over, and a moment later, a tornado descended from the sky and landed right on top of Malum. An eerie white funnel enveloped the Great Khan before catching up the wreckage and debris from the building collapse. Akira felt another idea being implanted in her mind by Sebakira. Caught inside the vortex, Malum would have to defend against physical and psionic threats at the same time. Akira, Sebakira, Tenna, and Trig loosed a final volley of soul fire into the vortex, which transformed into a hellish cyclone made of blue and purple fire. Akira amplified her own soul fire by concentrating hard on just how much she wanted Malum to suffer in the heart of that tornado, but that was when her luck ran out. She saw the color leave Aisling's eyes. The fairy went limp, and Akira knew what happened before Aisling hit the ground. "Brace yourselves! Here he comes!" Akira started to yell, but Malum was already counterattacking even as the tornado started to fade away. A bolt of lightning shot out of the darkness toward Akira. She tried to raise a psionic shield, knowing there was not enough time. Then the psi volt came to a dead stop in midair before dissipating. Someone had conjured a barrier to save Akira. She felt the hairs on her forearms stand up as she sensed the arrival of 2 more people. A strained, scratchy voice came from somewhere behind Akira. "It is fitting that we meet on the field of battle. I have no intention of quibbling over ideologies, histories, or objectives. You have endangered not just my world, but the very reality to which we all cling to life. For this, you must die." A moment later, a much younger voice spoke in a gruff, tomboyish tone. "And that sword doesn't belong to you. Give it back to my predecessor now. Don't make me take it by force." Akira turned around and felt as though her heart had grown 2 sizes. 2 of the big 3, Akira gasped. She was looking at 2 of the central leading protagonists of the Stormbreaker universe. Mira Mihaka towered over Akira, her red and black Advent Army armor allowing her to melt into the night. A deep power shimmered behind her purple eyes. Mira was clutching her iconic weapon from the Stormbreakers, the demon katana Hashiman. Toa Vahine Mami Tamihana had once owned the Soul Keeper, so she was holding her own version of it now. The glittering crystal blade reflected light onto her face, showing her extensive Mori facial tattoos and the dark red eye patch over the spot where her left eye used to be. A green gemstone was fitted to the patch, and it seemed to stare through Akira like a magical eye. Toa Mami's green and red power armor stood out in stark contrast to her snow-white hair. Varian spotted the two protagonists, then looked at Malum. He or she erupted into triumphant laughter and yelled, "Ha ha! You're so screwed now!"